Here we are again, but this time with a different theme. As you can see, with a whole lot of stuff in front of us, which is all to do with drawing and painting and looking. The more you look, the more you see. That's our mantra.
Well, on this table you can see a range of materials, almost the tip of the iceberg. We have so much stuff. Some of this stuff we use again and again and again, and shamefully some of this we bought and perhaps haven't used because it wasn't as useful.
And so we're going to go through stage by stage. So what are we going to be doing? We're going to be talking about all the materials, we're talking about drawing, and the way that you can draw, and there'll be some quite surprising ways that you can draw that we'll show you. And we're going to make it fun too, because there's nothing worse than sort of getting all tense. And we really want you to learn to look, and hopefully we'll give you some ideas. I'm going to talk about pencils a little more today because I think they're underused. I know we pick them up just to do the odd diagram and shopping list, but I think they're still underused as far as actually drawing and doing beautiful sensitive surfaces. And because this is quite a soft pencil, the tone of it is actually evening it out, and I'll correct that in a minute. So as I'm going round into the light, I'm getting less and less and less, but I'm still trying to make sure that I join that bottom ellipse. And then I might hardly have anything to do, it might just be a hint of shading there. So I'm just beginning, and then this side I might want to make that slightly darker. I set up a little still life, mostly in white. It's quite good if you're learning to do still life, is to set things up with the same colour so you don't get caught up with labels and little bits and pieces. And I've often done this at school, and a lot of people think that still life is really boring. And I did, I think, when I was a student at art college, but I've now realised that the more you do, where you have to think about the relationship of one shape to the other, it helps in all sorts of things, whatever your discipline is, whether you're a screen printer or an embroiderer or whatever.
So colour is something that really excites us, and there are so many different types of media for colour that I know it confuses people, so we're here trying to perhaps simplify things, and we're starting with aquarelle. If you really like to get into that thickness and the brush, there we go. So on that page we have a range of aquarelles, aqua media that respond to water, that give you lots of possibilities for location, taking them to places where you can't carry water. And we always take aquarelles on holiday with us. And even if you don't have water, I have been known, to be honest, the Greek wine is not always that great. I've been known to mix it with wine or seawater to get seawater to get what I want. So it's a fabulous way of carrying colour, and it produces the most marvellous effect. And of course, when you've done that, but I think you have a very interesting way of using yours, don't you?
Well, I sometimes find that when I'm actually putting the marks down here, I can't always get rid of them, and I don't want them, so sometimes I use this as a palette, and so that if I have a scrap of paper and literally lift the colour over to where I want it to go. This time we're going to do a little bit more painting of actual things, observational painting. And some people, when they look at some of the work that Jean and I do, they think, you know, we could never do that. But I can tell you, everyone can learn to do it, but you have to realise it's usually done in layers. We can't do the whole painting in one go. When you look at those spores, I think most of you would think that that's very, very dark. Let me show you. And that's where I have to, so if I put black there, and these are the spores, and that's what most people see those as, the shapes. There's all little things, and there's one in here actually. And can you see it's beginning to come? That's beginning to look as if it's coming out. This is going round. These little spores aren't working terribly well at the moment, but I could keep on with that, and then these little marks down the stem, if I move that over, they're lovely, but they're not as important as you think. So if you half close your eyes, they'll look a sort of slightly messed. That's the bit that captured your attention in the first place, and these lovely little spores and things here, which will is why I picked it up in the first place.
Experimenting with materials is all very well and good, and it's a necessary part of the process, but there is much more satisfaction to be gained if you become engaged with a subject that's special to you. We've, over many years, had to set our students' summer sketchbooks. Mostly they've really enjoyed them. They've really enjoyed the challenge of focus looking. When you go somewhere and you just say, oh, keep a sketchbook, where do you start? So easy to, oh, I'll have a coffee, I'll think about it later. But once you know where to start, immediately your eyes are open and you see things differently. And we've looked at many subjects, and sometimes we take them on board. And one year we did edges, and this was a very busy year. And this particular sketchbook was a very thin sketchbook, because I thought we're going to be dealing with edges and borders, and I tore it. There were bits of an old boat, and the other thing was I thought, oh, when I've torn it, it's a much smaller page and I'll be able to get it finished. It won't take so long. But it's, once you start to look at edges, I mean, there's so much in lace and patterns and so on. But I think one of the most interesting ones that we tackled was spots and stripes. Now, for many people who think, oh, I can't draw a tree, can't draw a flower, oh, I can't draw a building. Spots and stripes, I can do that in your garden. Everywhere you look, there are stripes, there are patterns, there are shadows, there are railings, little spots. In your kitchen, if you were looking around for spots and stripes. So my spots and stripes sketchbook, this is the spots are actually log centres. We were in Germany, and as the logs dried, the colours were amazing, and also little spots on tree bark. But on holiday, poor Jan has heard this, but there was this octopus hanging up, and it was spread out to dry. And I was just drawing the little circles on the octopus and thoroughly enjoying it. And the taverna owner said to me, would you like a whole octopus? Anyway, he got the octopus out from the freezer, and it only had 2 tentacles. And I said, I really do need the whole 8. So the next thing I knew, the next morning, he called me down, and he produced this octopus in a bag. And when I took it up to draw on my balcony, it went pow, all over everywhere. And I thought, I've got to get this before it starts to smell. So I did pages and pages of octopus drawings and patterns and so on. And at the end of it, I took the octopus back, volunteered to pay for it, and he said, no, he would cook it, it would be fine. And so he did cook it, and that night, Jan and I felt we ought to eat the octopus, because it was decent of him to do it. And much as we loved his food, the octopus was one of the most awful things I've ever tasted.
This time we're going to be looking at collage, and it can be a very useful design medium. It also stops you getting too pernickety and using all the little details, especially if you're using some of your photographs, you're worried about putting every little single mark into it. And a collage makes you think simply. So not only is it a good way for observation and looking and drawing, because you're drawing with cut or torn paper, but also it's a very good middle way of going from your drawing to your design. And then I did it again, but using gesso this time to try and for me to almost feel the surface of the flakiness, of which I then painted. On this one I went back to aquarelle crayons and pen to try and get the same sort of feel. So I thought that I've probably got enough information to do a collage. So in this case, the first part of the tree, I've used tearing paper from magazines. Well, you can get some wonderful things from all these magazines, because, whether it's your Sunday papers or whether it's one of the gossipy magazines, you can always find colours that you want. You see, that one, David Beckham, I could have torn that out to get, not the actual David Beckham bit, but the actual piece of paper. I could get that sort of colour. I could have put that down, but I'd already done it. And so there are various things you can see. There's a part of somebody's costume, could be a part of a dress, could be part of an advert. I'm sure those little bits of colour there were, came from a similar sort of magazine. And also, if it jumps out too much, you can always knock it back with a little bit of paint to get the right sort of feel.
My pieces of work that I do with textiles often involve many layers. In fact, people ask, how it's done, and I'm happy to describe it, but there are so many layers, it's very difficult for them to understand. However, when I'm designing, I do my initial observations, we work through some of the exercises that Jan and I have discussed, and there comes a point quite close to the end when I start to design in such a way that it makes it much clearer for the textile work that I'm going to do. On the background of this, I have painted it already with acrylic paints and done a little bit of background printing. Now I'm going to use stencils and templates and thermofaxes and a whole mixture of things. Obviously you can make your own stencils, but if you look around, I collect stencils from whatever source I can. I found this one of ferns that I absolutely loved. So I've used that in certain cases, but it's not, the drawing isn't fine enough for what I want. But as a little bit of background, I did some printing. And all you do is take your little squeegee and pull, the first pull is often not particularly successful, down the screen. I don't mind if it's not too precise because I'm going to move it about. So I need to, now you lift it. And you can see I've got a really nice image of my ferns. Now, as you can see from this wall of designs, there were several different approaches to the snow moon. I originally did the printing and just as I've shown, and then when it was dry, I've gone in with graphite and pencil to exaggerate some of the areas I want to do. So you're never actually finished with the process. And I suppose that's one of the things that we often find quite puzzling, that people want to put you into a box. You're either designing or you're printing or you're drawing or you're doing something else. In fact, all these things are interchangeable and perfectly capable. So if some people might have thought, well, you don't do drawings on top of prints, of course you can.
And this is the other side of my workshop, or studio, whatever you like to call it. And like Jean, I have a notice board of half-finished things and children's drawings. I love this one. I love my granny. And this is a picture of Jean and I from my granddaughter and my other granddaughter. And they come in here and they love it because they know where the paper and the pencils and the paints are. Anyway, this is my work with the various things started. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but this is to do with my garden from the pond that I got really involved with. We did go into the garden and videoed the pond because I wanted you to see how humble it is, but beautiful as well. And so we first of all looked at the snails, and then we looked at the water, actually the fountain hitting the water and sort of bubbling up, which was really fascinating. You can almost meditate watching it. And then I suddenly thought, well, let's have a look closely at the duckweed. And when you look at it closely, and I had it under a magnifying glass to draw, it's really very delicate and much prettier than people think. And then of course the lily leaves, you're usually seeing the lovely luscious shiny lily leaves with the flower, which is what most people would go for, but I'm afraid I went for the lily leaf that's slightly dying and it becomes lacy, and because I like making lace, my eye immediately goes to that. And then the actual pieces that I did, I actually did some big scale designs first, just to get to the look of it and see what it looked like enlarged. Now this was my interpretation. I called this jeweled rain, but in fact it's not rain, it's the actual water coming from the fountain. But I like the fact that the way the lines of all the green gungy algae and weed went across in one diagonal, and I quite liked the opposite, the actual the movement of the water coming down, and then all the little sparkles of the water side. It gave me an excuse to use some beads.
If you remember the table absolutely heaving with stuff when we started, we've now reduced it to a much more concise bank of materials which we really enjoy working with.
And as I've shown you, my favourite is the gouache, the designer colour in white, which seems to thicken and blend with some of the colours we've used. And I hope that during the course of all the various sessions we've shown you, that you feel you could have a go. Not all of them, but it would mean that hopefully your observation will improve if you follow some of our ideas, and you'll enjoy it, and it will get rid of this silly myth that everybody has that they can't draw, because you can.